Hi, boys and girls. This is our final math assignment for 5th grade, assignment 6.03, which is some 6th grade math to help you get ready for next year. And in this assignment, I wanted you to convert fractions, decimals, and percentages and fill out this table. So I'm going to go over how you fill this out. I'm going to start with our very first one, which is the decimal, and that's 8/10. The first thing I wanted you to do is on this side here, I wanted you to go ahead and convert it into a fraction. Now, what I would do is I would take that 0 and 8/10 decimal, which I have already in the table, and I would convert that into a fraction. Now, the one thing that you got to remember is that the 0 and 8/10, if I just say it out loud, I've already got a fraction. It's 8, and then as my denominator is 10, 8/10. Now, the one thing I mentioned in the lesson is that we also need to take this 8/10 and we need to simplify it, because right now it's not simplified. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and divide that by 2 on both sides, and that's going to equal 4/5. And so my fraction is going to be 4/5. And I can't really type that in as a fraction, so I'm just going to use a line like this to show 4/5. That is my simplified fraction. Now, over on the other side, boys and girls, I'm going to be turning this decimal into a percentage. And that's pretty simple to do. All I do is, if you remember, percent is out of 100. So I'm going to take 0 and 8/10 and multiply it times 100. Multiplying by 100 means I'm going to move the decimal over 2 spaces. So I'm going to add some zeros. 1, 2. Move my decimal over. And now my 0 and 8/10 has become a percentage, and the percentage is 80%. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in, just kind of anywhere. And make sure I put that percent sign. And let's go and we'll go through the rest of these. Now, the next one we have to work with is we have our percentage, 24%, but we don't have the decimal and we don't have the fraction. So what we're going to do is we're going to move that 24% into a decimal. And mostly what we do is we just take off the decimal sign. Or I'm sorry, not the decimal sign, but the percent sign. We take that percent sign off, and now we have 24. And we write that as 24 over 100, because this percent means out of 100. And when you see we have 24 hundredths, that means that we just take a 0 and write it as a standard form, 0 and 24 hundredths, just like that. So we can take a look, and we'll put inside of our decimal column right here, 0 and 24 hundredths. Oops, added the decimal first. 0 and 24 hundredths. Now, that 24 hundredths fraction that I just made is a fraction, and I could put it over here, but I want to wait before I mark my fraction to make sure that I haven't actually simplified. And I haven't. 24 hundredths, 24 and 100 are both even numbers, so I can divide them both by 2 and get 12 over 50. And they're still even numbers, so I can divide it again by 2 and get 6 over 25. And at this point, I don't think I can simplify it anymore. I can divide 6. Nope. I can't divide 25 by anything and 6 by the same number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 6 over 25 that I simplified down from 24 over 100, and now I'm going to be placing it inside my next place for the fraction. So 24% is 24 hundredths. It can also be 6. Oops, forgot to put it into my box here. So it'll be 6 over 24. Good. Didn't actually write that in the right place. So let me just do that one more time. All right. 6 over 25. 6/25 is our fraction. All right, we'll go on down now to look at the next one. Now, this one right here, we have a fraction. We have 7/8. We just need to go ahead and convert that now into a decimal and into a percent. This time, we're going to write it up here as 7/8, which is equal to dividing. we can actually divide to get our decimal. So that's what we'll do. We're going to turn around, go sideways here. And our 7 will go inside the dividing box. 8 will go outside as a divisor. Go ahead and we'll start to divide. We can't really divide anything 8 by nothing. 8 times 0 is the only thing we can do. We'll put a 0 there. We'll make a decimal after the 7. Put the decimal right up there. 8 times 0 is 0. Drop down the 7. Add a 0 and annex it, and drop down another 7. Or drop down another 0. 8 times 8 is 64, which is pretty close to 70. 70 minus 64 is 6. Annex another 0. And it looks like I might have squished. Yeah, let me just erase this 7/8 so I have some room. Drop down this next 0. That gives me 60. 8 times 7 is 56. Now I have a remainder of 4. At this point, boys and girls, because I have a remainder of 4, I'm going to go into my thousandths place. 0, annex one more 0, drop it down. Now I have 40. 8 times 5 is 40. Now I don't have a remainder. So what you could do at this point, boys and girls, is you can either keep it at 0 and 875 thousandths, or you can round it. You can round to the nearest hundredths place. The hundredths place is the 7. I look at my 5 or more, raise the score. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn 0 and 875 thousandths into, rounded right over here. We'll zoom in a lot more. I'm going to round that to 0 and 88 hundredths. And that's what I'm going to be placing here in the decimal column. 0 and 88 hundredths. Now, by looking at that 0 and 88 hundredths, that's really easy to turn that into a percent. All I do is multiply that by 100, moving the decimal space over 2 spaces. So I get, instead of 88 hundredths, I get the number after I multiply by 100, 88. And just add a percent sign. And I have 88%. And that's all there is to that one. We're going to move on down now to 45%. Now, with 45%, we have the percentage, but what we need to do is we need to convert that into a fraction and a decimal. Let's first convert it into a decimal. 45%, I just remember that percent is out of 100. So I take 45 and I take off the percent sign, put 100 over it. So it's 45 out of 100. And now I know that I can write that as 45 hundredths. So what I'll do right here is type that in. That my decimal is 0 and 0 and 45 hundredths. Now, boys and girls, I want you to look at this fraction that I wrote earlier, 45 over 100. That can be my fraction that I can put over here in my fraction column. But the first thing I need to do is make sure I simplify it. And I do notice that both this ends in 5 and this ends in 0, so that means I can divide them both by 5. So 100 divided by 5 is 20. 45 divided by 5 is equal to 9. I can't simplify that anymore. I can't divide 9 by anything and 20 by the same number. So what I'll do is I'll leave that as the new simplified fraction. The new simplified fraction right here for 45 hundredths is 9 over 20. All right, let's move on down. Now on our next column, we're going to see that this is 14 hundredths. So what I'll do is I did our multiplication by 100 and move my decimal over, and I got 14%. Now over here on the decimal, I can write that as 14 over 100, and I'll write that right here. And again, I'll want to simplify that. When I simplify it down, I'll simplify it by dividing it by 2 because they're both even numbers. I get 7 over 50, and that's as simple as we can get it. So we'll go ahead right here and put our fraction as 7 over 50 as our simplified fraction. We're going to move on. Now, again, we have this time we have a percent. It's 5%, and we need to turn that into a decimal. By turning that into a decimal, 5%, let's first make it a fraction so we know. 5%, we'll take away the percent sign, and we'll put it over 100. Because it's 5 out of 100, or percent out of 100. Seeing that 5 over 100, 500ths, pretty much gives away how I'm going to type it as a decimal. So what I'll do is I'll type that as 0 and 500ths. And then again, I have that fraction. Before I write it down in my fraction column, I do want to make sure it's simplified. Let's go ahead and divide that both by 5, because I can divide both of them by 5, 1 over 20. So 500ths is the same as saying it's the fraction, and I'll type it right over here. 0 and 500ths. Oops, yes, I wrote it out as a decimal. Let me do 5 over 100, and that's not the simplified version. It's 1 over 20. All right, boys and girls, let's move on down to our next one. This time we're going to look at, this time we're going to look at 2/5. So what we're going to do is we are going to turn that into a decimal. Now to get 2/5 into a decimal, we're going to do the following. We're going to take 2 over 5, and we need to turn it into a decimal that has a fraction that has 100, or 10. In this case, I can multiply 5 times 2 to get 10. Great, I don't have to divide. 2 times 2 is equal to 4. So my fraction that can be used as a decimal is going to be 4/10. And when I read that out loud, I know what my decimal is going to be. It's going to be 0 and 4/10. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to multiply that 4/10 decimal right over here. And I'll just write it right here. 0 and 4/10, I'm going to multiply by 100. When I do that, I'm going to move the decimal over 2 spaces, 1, 2, and end up with 40. Then I'm going to add my percent sign, and I now have 40%. Okay, moving on down to our next decimal, which is 0 and 200ths. When I hear that 200ths, I know that my fraction will be 2 over 100, which I can simplify in a minute. First, I'm going to go over here and take that 200ths and turn it into a percent. I'm going to multiply that by 100. Move the decimal over 2 spaces, so it becomes 2. And then I'm going to add on a percent sign, and our 200ths becomes 2%. Next thing I'll do is I'll go back to that fraction, 2 over 100, and I can divide that by 2. When I do that, that's this little squished right here. Let me try that over down here. When I divide 2 over 100 by 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom, I end up with 1 over 50, and that's my simplified fraction. And that's what I want to write here, 1 over 50. That's a little small, so I'll zoom it up a little bit. All right. All right, we're going to move on now to the next percent, which is 60%. Now with 60%, all I do is I take off the percent sign, and it's 60 out of 100, so I know that my fraction can be 60 hundredths, and that's going to give me my decimal, which is equal to 0 and 60 hundredths. Oops, no. 0 and 60 hundredths, or I could just say 6/10. Either one is okay. And actually, when I simplify that, I can take a look at this and simplify this fraction down by just first crossing out 2 zeros. The same 0, 0, which gets 6/10. But I'm still not fully simplified. Since they're both even numbers, I'm going to go ahead and simplify these down. 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So my simplified fraction here is 3/5. I'm getting the small numbers here, so I want to zoom in and make sure. All right. Okay, we have 2 more to do. Now my next fraction is going to be 3/4, and I need to convert that into a percent and a decimal. Now to convert 3/4, I could divide, but I also realize that if I multiply 4 times 25, I'll get a fraction with a decimal, or a fraction with 100 on the bottom. So that's what I'll do. 4 times 25 is 100. Whatever I do on the bottom, I'll do on the top. 3 times 25 is equal to 75. Now I know that this is 75 hundredths, or 75 out of 100. So that means that I can write my decimal down as 0 and 75 hundredths. And I also know that I can multiply that by 100, and I will get 75 and add a percent sign, and I get 75%. My next step, boys and girls, is I'm going to be taking another decimal right here, 94 hundredths, and I'm going to turn that into a fraction, and I'm going to turn it into a percent. I think the first thing I'll do is I'll just turn it into a percent. I'll take 94 hundredths and multiply it by 100 to get a percent. That means I'm going to move the decimal over 2 spaces, and that gets 94. So then all I do is I add a percent sign, and I've got 94%. The next thing I'm going to do, and this is my final conversion problem of the final assignment of the final thing I'm doing for math for 5th grade. So here it goes. 94 hundredths I can write as a fraction, 94 over 100. I want to simplify that. I know that 4 shows me that 94 is an even number, so I'm going to divide it by 2. And I'll divide the 100 by 2. 100 divided by 2 is 50. 94 divided by 2, I'm just got to do a little bit of math down here. I don't know that off the top of my head. So I'll just make sure to do some quick math here. Accurate math, which would even be better. 2 times 4 is 8. Now I'm going to say, kids 1, 4. Okay, so it's 47. And 94 divided by 2 is 47. So my fraction is 47 over 50, which I cannot simplify anymore. So boys and girls, I'm going to go ahead and put right here as my fraction equivalent to 94 hundredths, 47 over 50. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see that. All right, and there you go. Now, boys and girls, that is completing all the answers here. If you want to go through this and check this a little more, go ahead and do so. You can pause the video at any time and just look at your answers to make sure they match what I've got. And I noticed I made a little typo right here while I was typing quickly, so I'm just going to get rid of that 88, that 0 after 88 right there. Everything else, boys and girls, if you need to, pause the video and just check it. After that, what I want you to do is I want you to show me your work, show me this final assignment for 5th grade on a Flipgrid video, and tell me how you did on it. Tell me if you think you're ready for 6th grade and this skill. Thanks, boys and girls. Bye-bye.